Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance for our program is provided by the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Welcome to Oklahoma Gardening. Today we show you how to add a bit more orange into your garden, how to make sense of the information on a plant tag. Dr. Mitchell shares with us a backpack full of plant goodies while I visit OSU's campus to take a closer look at some of their towering trees. And finally, Barbara Brown joins us to make a cauliflower curry.
Over the years, we've talked a lot about orchids. Now, most of those orchids that we've referenced have been the indoor orchids or some of those epiphytic orchids that you see growing in baskets or on bark that a lot of times we like to keep in our house and produce beautiful flowers. Today we're going to show you a different orchid. This is the orange Reed Stemmed Orchid. And you can see that this is actually a terrestrial orchid. So it's not one that's going to be growing with a lot of exposed roots. It actually prefers to grow in a media of some sort. Because this is a terrestrial orchid, you can plant this in the ground in your landscape as an annual. It will propagate and spread fairly well, and what you can see here is, unlike a lot of those epiphytic orchids that have a lot of exposed roots, you do have a few roots, but not nearly as many. If you do choose to put it in the ground, you just want to make sure that it is in a sandy, well-drained location, because it does like not sitting in any sort of moisture. Here we've chosen to go ahead and put it in a pot. And when you put it in a pot, you want to make sure to incorporate either some sand or some succulent media or something that allows for a lot of good flow, like bark mix or something like that. The other thing is you want to make sure that you've got a container that has holes, because it's not going to drain if you put it in a container that doesn't have holes in it. And finally, my last recommendation would be to put it in a container that's heavy as itself. As you can see, this orchid gets pretty tall, about 2.5 to 3 foot tall, especially when it's flowering. And so our Oklahoma winds can be strong, and having a heavier container will prevent it from tipping over. Now you can see why this plant is used as an accent in the landscape, because of the beautiful kind of orangish yellow flowers that it produces prolifically throughout the season. It's going to continue to flower over the summer months, and will even continue into the winter months if you continue to provide it with enough light and warmth. Now, the other benefit of having it in a container is the fact that although it's an annual in our climate, you can bring it inside in those winter months, and as I said, it might still continue to bloom for you. So if you're looking to add a little orange accent into your landscape, you might try the orange Reed Stemmed Orchid.
As a beginning gardener, it can be really confusing starting out. You're really excited, so you go to the nursery or any other store with plants, and you just start looking around at all the different kinds of plants there are. You pull a tag out of one of the plants, and you realize there's a lot of symbols and words that you don't understand. So one of the first things you'll want to know about is your plant name. So your plant goes by several different names. Most commonly, you will use your common name for the plant. This is not specific at all, and you could be referencing a multitude of plants with one specific name. To be more specific in your names, you want to use the scientific name. The scientific name is a Latin name that does not change, and so you could be talking with someone across the world, and if you use the scientific name, if they know anything about plants, they'll understand what you're talking about. To be even more specific than that, you'll add the cultivar name to the end of that. The cultivar name is within single quotation marks at the end of the scientific name. A cultivar is a cultivated variety, which means that humans had intervened and selected for certain traits, such as the color of the leaves, the flowers, and other hardiness type of traits. The next thing you might want to know about is the life cycle of your plant. Your plant could be an annual or a perennial. Those are the two most common life cycles. An annual is a plant that grows, reproduces, and dies within one season. A perennial, on the other hand, is a plant that grows, reproduces, and it will live for many different seasons. It will come back year after year, and it will just keep growing until it reaches its mature size, and eventually it'll die. Knowing whether a plant is an annual or a perennial is really important in knowing how much space to give it. On your plant label, there will be different measurements. So you might see height, width, or spacing, and each of them will have a different measurement with them. The height and width is the size of your plant whenever it reaches full maturity. So you want to make sure to give it as much space as it requires. So your plant will keep growing and growing, and if you put your plants too close together, then you'll have an increase of pathogens, diseases, pests, and they'll also be competing for other resources and other nutrients. Another term you might see is sun requirements or lighting. There are several different types of terms related to this. You might see a term that says full sun. It's also referenced as sun. This means your plant needs 6 or more hours of sunlight to be healthy and thrive in the place it's planted. Another term you might see is part sun. This means your plant needs 3 to 6 hours of sunlight. It can handle the more intense afternoon sunlight as well. On the other hand, a part shade plant also needs 3 to 6 hours of sunlight, but it does not like the more intense afternoon sun. It prefers the morning sun. Another term you might see within that is full shade or just shade. This means your plant would like 2 or less hours of sunlight each day. You could place it to where it gets 2 hours of morning sun or underneath a tree where it will have the light filtered through the tree branches. Another term you might see on your plant label is zone, hardy to, hardiness, or anything related to that or a temperature. The USDA created the hardiness zone map. It divided the United States into 13 different zones. Each zone is divided by 10-degree differences. They took the average annual low temperature for each zone. So Oklahoma is in 3 separate zones. Zone 6A in the northwest corner, and Zone AA in the southeast corner. You might have noticed that I said the letter A after the number. Each zone is further divided into A and B, and the difference is that Zone A is 5 degrees cooler than Zone B. So Oklahoma, the bulk of Oklahoma is in Zone 7. So Zone 7A is 5 degrees cooler than Zone 7B. Understanding these basic terms when it refers to plants will give you a good jump start on having a happy and healthy garden. I hope that you gain a little bit more confidence in your plant selections. If you want any more information, check out this fact sheet.
Last time I introduced you to Gardens to Go, which was a lunchbox kit with 18 activities for elementary age kids that had to do with gardening. Now I have created a level 2 kit, which I call Plantology, and it comes in a backpack. And it's made for grades 6 through 12 or more advanced elementary kids. So this kit comes with a booklet with 12 activities described, and these are more intensive activities that require a little bit more time, a little bit more work. So one of the activities is classification. You learn how to classify, so I'm giving you aliens instead of plants, so you don't have any preconceived notions. And you end up making a dichotomous key with this, and then there's newly discovered aliens that you put into your key later. So it's just like real life. Another activity, we talk about tree rings and how you can tell how old a tree is by the tree rings. Well, one way you can tell how old a tree is without cutting down the tree is to take cores. And so all of these lines are basically what the tree ring would be. So we practice here, and you notice that if you know how old a tree is when it's cut down, you can count back to when it was germinated, and then by overlapping trees of the same species that were grown in the same area, you can see like, okay, this tree, didn't go back as far as this one. So if we know this one was cut down in 84, we can go see when it was germinated, and we can see the different ages by relating them. And you get some actual tree core samples, and you can actually find out where they overlap. And so you can answer questions about when was a cabin built if we cut it down on this year, when was the tree germinated if we cut it down that year. Another thing you can do is we have a sprinkler gauge. So you can put this in your yard. They tell you to put 1 inch of water on your lawn every week. How do you know when you've hit an inch? You put this in different places, see how long it takes to get to an inch. Another activity is we have a little hydroponics kit here. This is rock wool, so it's not actually soil, but you can grow plants in it. So we're just using water to grow plants, so there's hydroponics. We have a little activity where you make a flower out of toothpicks and Q-tips and a straw and tissue paper, complete all the way from the roots to the pollen. We have another activity where you become a plant and you roll the die to see what the weather's going to be. And depending on how many leaves you have and what the sun was like and how much water you lost due to transpiration, you have to figure out how to save the sugars you created and save it up and either buy a root or a leaf to get through the season as you're growing. And then if you save up enough sugars, you get to make a flower, which is what you need for your species to reproduce. And in real life, they die at the first frost a lot of times. So after you get 15 rolls of the die, you have to roll 2. And if you get doubles, that was the frost. So you never know when it's going to end, just like real life. And my favorite part about this is a resurrection plant. These are from the Chihuahuan Desert on the US-Mexican border, and they don't get much rain, so they can go into a really, really dormant state. But if you just add water, a few hours later, they open up. And you can see how they photosynthesize, but take away the water, and in a day or two, it'll go back to being that dried up looking state. So again, these Plantology kits are for level 2 gardening kits. So this is for like middle school to high school, and it has 12 advanced activities like you see here. We do still have the level 1 Gardens to Go kit, which has 18 activities in a lunchbox. And if you're interested in either one of these, just contact me.
So often when we talk about trees, we tend to think of large deciduous shade trees. But more often than not, in small residential backyards, we might not have the space to plant something that gets quite this large. Now that doesn't mean that you can't still add trees into your landscape. It just might mean that you're looking for a different cultivar. And in fact, in urban landscapes where we have tall buildings, it's even more important to add vertical vegetation to soften those harsh edges of the buildings. That's why today we're going to take a look at our top 5 columnar trees. With so many great oaks across the landscape, I wanted to offer you a couple of cultivars that are also columnar. This particular one is called Birthday Candle and is hardy from zones 4 to 9. It will reach a max height of 45 feet with a spread of 18 feet, and it will have traditional yellow and orange fall color. Here we have another columnar oak, and this particular cultivar is called Chimney Fire. Now it's going to get a little bit larger than Birthday Candle with a height of 50 to 60 feet and a spread of 20 feet. As the name implies, Chimney Fire is actually going to have red foliage in the fall. Sweet gums often get a bad reputation because of those spiny seed balls that they produce. But this particular cultivar will add just the right amount of touch of texture into any landscape. slender silhouette is going to reach a height of 35 to 50 feet and remain an impressive 4 feet wide. Now, while this slender silhouette still produces those spiky seeds, it's not going to be like your traditional sweet gum that litter all over your yard because it has a much smaller canopy, so it's going to only cover a smaller area in your yard. Now, this particular cultivar, the original, was actually discovered by a nurseryman named Don Shadow near some railroad tracks, and the original tree was 60 feet tall and an impressive only 3 feet wide. It is native to most of eastern North America, just shy of New England, all the way down to Central America. Just because we're talking about trees doesn't mean that we can't also get some flowers with those trees. Now, I'm not talking about magnolias, which are sometimes the go-to flowering tree, but in fact, I am talking about a tree that is in the magnolia family. This is the tulip tree. Now, you might be familiar with the native species of tulip tree, but this particular cultivar is called Arnold. And just like the native species, it's going to develop those yellowish green tulip-like flowers that are high up in the canopy. By incorporating Arnold next to a multi-story building, you're going to be able to bring those flowers right up to the audience that's in the windows. Arnold will max out at 50 feet tall with a 15-foot spread. Carpinus betulus, also known as common hornbeam or musclewood, because the trunk of the tree, as it matures, the bark tends to look like muscle. Now, this is a very strong wooded tree. In fact, it's such a hard wooded tree that back in the day, it used to be used to make yokes for oxen. And in fact, that's actually how it got its common name, hornbeam, because a yoke is the beam between the horns of the oxen. Now, this particular cultivar is a fastigiata, therefore it has more upright growth of the branching habits. In fact, if you see that word fastigiata or fastigiate, which is sometimes associated with other plants, that means that it's going to have a little bit more of a columnar habit to that plant. Now, this particular cultivar, fastigiata, is going to reach 40 feet tall and it's going to stay more upright. But as it matures, it will widen up and have a little bit more of a teardrop shape to it. But it's still a great cultivar to add to any narrow space. Zelkova serrata is a great urban tree as it can tolerate polluted soils and those urban environments. Now, typically, the standard tree does have more of a V or vase shape habit, which is nice, especially if you're trying to grow turf grass, sun-loving turf grass up around that tree. However, this particular cultivar is Musashino, which is going to reach a height of 45 feet with a spread of 10 to 15 feet. Now, you can see this tree did suffer from some ice damage this past fall, but typically doesn't need any pruning and is a fast-growing tree from zones 5 to 9. So while you may have been familiar with some of those straight species, that's the skinny on adding some columnar cultivars to even the narrowest of landscapes.
I've always been fascinated by curries. When I was in college, I had my first one and I thought it was terrific, but I've never been happy with what I've duplicated. So I've kept working on it, keep liking them, and today we're going to try a cauliflower and potato curry. So I'm going to start with about a half a cup of water in a large pan because we want enough room here for everything to cook. We're going to be adding quite a few ingredients later. And to that I'm going to add about one medium onion that's been chopped up. I also, you could measure it out, it'd be about a cup of onion. We're going to let that just cook in the water basically for about 3 minutes until it starts to become a little translucent. We're reducing the amount of fat here. If you wanted to cook this in a little bit of vegetable oil, you could do that. I'm trying to cut the calories back on this just a tad. But that would enable you to carry some of the flavors that are not water soluble a little bit better because there's nothing else in here that I'm going to add that's going to give you fat to this. If you do that, we can add a little bit of water as cooking goes along with some of the other ingredients if things start to stick. So feel free to switch it out with maybe 1 to 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil or olive oil if you choose to instead of the water. Otherwise, it's going to cook for a couple of minutes. We'll assume that has happened, and I'm going to add to that about 3 to 5 red potatoes. I want to make sure that you're using a potato that's going to hold its shape as it cooks. If you use a russet potato, it's going to fall apart. Makes a great mashed potato or a potato soup, but doesn't do as well for something like this. So we're just going to add those. I've cut them into fairly big chunks, and to that I'm also going to add about 3 cups of cauliflower. Recipes always say 1 head, 1/2 a head. I've never found that useful because the heads aren't uniform in size. So this is going to come to a boil. We're going to turn it down and let it simmer. And this will cook, again, somewhere between 3 to 5 minutes. If, again, you start to run out of water, add a little bit more, because if potatoes scorch on you, you're not going to be able to go back and get that out of there. You're just going to have to start over because you won't cover up the flavors of the potato, the scorch. So I'm going to, while that's working, we're going to try and find the right burner here, and I'm going to start working on the spices that are going to go in with this. Now, most of the recipes that I've used have used a curry powder, which for Americans is a convenience food product, just like we use baking powder instead of having to mix things around. So I'm actually going to start the way an Indian family would, although theirs would be a much better selection. And I've got individual spices and herbs here. So I'm going to start with a 1/2 teaspoon of cumin seeds and put those in here. I'm going to toast these so that the flavors develop more. I'm going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of turmeric, 1/2 teaspoon of coriander, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground ginger, 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, and then somewhere between an 1/8 to a 1/4, even a 1/2 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. It's going to depend totally on how spicy you want this to be. Now, this you're going to toast for up to 2 minutes, but you're going to have to keep your nose on it and stir it constantly to make sure that it doesn't go, again, beyond where you want the flavors to be. What you're trying to do is get those flavors to bloom for you. Once you get your spices and herb mix done, then make sure you take it off the heat. You may even want to transfer it to another pan because you don't want it continued cooking, and this pan will be hot and it will continue to cook on you. You'll also notice that as they get blended together, they take on a different appearance. It's not that they brown so much. Most of them were brown before. They're not clumped. They're just well blended together. They've got a sort of a toasty look to them. Okay. You notice that most of the water's gone. You need to stir this fairly often as it cooks. It doesn't have to be constantly like the spices were, but you need to stir it enough that you can make sure that it's not sticking on you or not scorching on you. Once you have got it cooked just a little bit, I'm going to add a couple of more ingredients. One is a 14.5 ounce or 2 cups worth of either chopped or crushed tomatoes. I use canned. You could use fresh if you chose. I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of golden raisins. Now, raisins are here to add a little bit of sweetness to counteract some of the spices. They are not essential. You could use a couple of tablespoons of apple juice concentrate if you don't want to use raisins. And then also I'm going to add our spice mixture. And remember, this has turmeric in it, so it's going to add a lot of yellow color. And if you've got utensils that you don't want discolored, don't use them in this because they will end up with that yellow color, and it will spread throughout the cauliflower and the potatoes as these cook. The other thing I'm going to add is about a 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt, and that's going to help tie all those flavors together. About 20 minutes. Again, check it from time to time to make sure that it's not sticking. Turn it down if you need to. It just needs to be at a simmer, and some of the liquids are going to come out of some of those vegetables, and it's going to make a great sauce to go with it. All right, doesn't that look great? You've got all that great color now. Instead of white potatoes and white cauliflower, you have this beautiful golden color mixed in with the red. We're going to serve this over some brown rice. And I think you're going to find that if you're a curry fan, This is a terrific recipe to start with because you can start with this blend of herbs and spices and make it more spicy. You can mellow it out with a few more raisins. You can just really play with it. And I'm just going to put on some parsley, the cook's friend here, just to make it look prettier. I hope you'll give this one a try. It's cauliflower and potato curry. For Oklahoma Gardening, I'm Barbara Brown.
There are a lot of great horticulture activities this time of year. Be sure and consider some of these events in the weeks ahead. As summer heats up, so do some of those garden problems. Join us next week as we tackle algae in the water garden. I'll share some tips on saving money while helping the environment. Plus, you won't want to miss the Oklahoma Proven Annual for 2021. To find out more information about show topics as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure to visit our website at oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussion on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. Tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater gem. We would like to thank our generous underwriter, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is also provided by Pond Pro Shops, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, the Oklahoma Horticultural Society, and Tulsa Garden Club.